is incredibly brave to take this stance after you've made $300, $400 million not being woke, right? Loving Donald Trump, exploiting the mentally ill, wearing blackface. Look at the crop of woke comments, whether it's Stern or Jimmy Kimmel, his BFF, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, Michael Ian Black. What do they all have in common? They wore blackface. And then they went woke. It's not a chicken or egg thing there. You know what order it came. So I call this BFR. It's blackface reparations. There's nothing in Stern's previous career that could withstand this modern witch hunt that he now embraces. So this is a form of restitution. Maybe he says, you know, if I'm woke too, the crocodile will eat me last. But they always do eat. But I get it. He flipped from populist to elitist because now he's with elitists.
That the king of the most misogynistic humor ever now turns into a breathless over a progressive, hopelessly shallow candidate. But maybe that's the explanation. This is Stern's self-imposed penance for subjugating women to demoralizing stunts, capitalizing on desperate females thirsting for attention, even if it's from an oily paddle striking their bare.
Howard Stern used to be the roaring lion of radio, loud, fearless, and untamed. But when Greg Gutfeld took a swing at him on live TV, the once unshakable king of shock didn't growl. He froze. No comeback. No fire, just a tense silence that screamed louder than any rant Stern had ever delivered. It was a moment so charged, so raw, it didn't need fireworks to explode. It detonated with quiet humiliation. Gutfeld didn't just jab Stern's legacy. He set it on fire with a smite, leaving the self-declared rebel exposed and cornered. This wasn't a celebrity spat. Discover more. Educational resources. Movie hash film. Restaurants. It was a cultural earthquake. Stein, once the master of tearing down phonies, now looked like the very thing he used to destroy. And Gutfeld didn't miss a beat. He saw the weakness and went straight for the jugular. Howard Stern, the rebel, please. Gutfeld laughed, practically daring the legend to defend himself.
You should hear what keeps him up at night.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there.
Well, he's half right. We do need a wall. You know, to keep out gang members, fentanyl dealers, human traffickers, and Anna Navarro. What's funny, though, is that Stern actually thought that was a compliment. Stern has become such a wussified sycophant, he doesn't realize that telling Kamala that he'd vote for a wall is telling her that he knows she's as dumb as one.
But Stern just sat there, silent, stunned, and strangely small. The crowd didn't know whether to gasp or laugh. It was that surreal. Imagine building an empire by mocking the elite only to become one of them. That's what Gutfeld exposed. Stern sipping wine with celebrities while lecturing the world from a luxury bubble. It was satire writing itself. Stern's fans weren't just disappointed. They were betrayed. The man who used to roast Hollywood phonies was now posing with them at five-star restaurants. And worst of all, he called that life exhausting, as if he'd been mining coal, not drinking with Aniston. Gutfeld mocked Stern's idea of struggle. Walking from your wine cellar to the tennis court isn't suffering. And people erupted because they knew this wasn't rebellion anymore. It was delusion. What Gutfeld unleashed wasn't just an insult. It was a reckoning. He took everything Stein once stood for and flipped it on its head. It wasn't loud. It was surgical, like a mirror, reflecting the painful truth Stern didn't want to face. Years ago, Stern would have burned down a studio over something like this. He would have fired back with fury. But now he sat there looking more like a daytime talk host than the raw, untamed voice that once rattled the FCC. Gutfeld didn't need to shout. He let Stern's silence be the punchline. This is what rebellion looks like now, he teased, and it hit like a brick. Stern had walked into his own takedown and didn't even realize it until it was too late.
But that's how Stern can call snacking with celebs at a fancy restaurant exhausting. Exhausting. Like he finished the overnight shift in a coal mine, or hearing Kat talk about her pets.
fair.
But I get it, life is tough, especially when you've been cut off from the world for 2 years in a $20 million beach house. I mean, you have no idea how tiring it is walking all the way from the wine cellar to the tennis court and back.
Stern once reveled in chaos, bathing in controversy like a badge of honor. But now he seemed obsessed with being liked by the very elites he once mocked. The transformation wasn't shocking. It was heartbreaking. Back in the day, Stern would have mocked someone like, well, himself. That old version of him would have torn into this new version without mercy. But the fire that once made him feared across the airwaves gone. Instead of roaring, Stern now whispers. Instead of biting, he flatters. He's gone from pushing buttons to polishing reputations. The king of rebellion had traded his crown for a dinner reservation. Gutfeld couldn't believe it, and neither could the audience. This wasn't the man who broke boundaries and terrified the establishment. This was a Hollywood darling trying to play it safe while pretending he still had edge. And what made it worse, Stern didn't even seem to notice how far he'd fallen. He sat through Gutfeld's dismantling without a single flash of the old spark. It was like watching a lion play fetch at a Beverly Hills dog park. Gutfeld exposed more than hypocrisy. He revealed Stern's complete surrender. The man who once destroyed fake rebels had become the most polished pretender of them all. It was ironic, tragic, and absolutely viral. There was no screaming match, no dramatic rebuttal, just a slow, humiliating realization that the crown no longer fit. Gutfeld didn't just challenge Stern. He replaced him as the voice that dares to say what others won't. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. It was the sound of a legacy cracking under the weight of comfort and conformity.
I will say this, Dagan. I thank God for Howard Stern because he does make me feel normal by comparison. Because I'm like the fox recluse. I don't do anything. I don't go anywhere. But he makes me look like, Pete Davidson on a...
Yeah, he's a germaphobe. Like, his wife rescues cats. That's her job, apparently, her thing. But you can get toxoplasmosis.
That's
and
true.
Cryptosporidiosis.
AIDS.
And
no, you can't.
No,
but
you can't get.
No, you can't.
But you can get.
I mean, what are the chances I get that again?
Like a lot of diarrhea related.
And people could feel it. This was no ordinary segment. It was history. While Stern clung to old fame in his mansion, Gutfeld built a new empire from raw commentary and brutal honesty. The throne wasn't taken. It was abandoned. And Gutfeld simply stepped in and claimed it without hesitation. The world watched, not just entertained, but stunned as a once untouchable icon was dethroned, not with rage, but with reality. And that reality hit like a freight train wrapped in sarcasm and delivered live on national television. They are moments in television that vanish as quickly as they appear. But this one carved itself into pop culture like a scar. It wasn't just about Greg Gutfeld embarrassing Howard Stern. It was about one era devouring another in real time. The camera didn't need to zoom in to catch the discomfort on Stern's face. It radiated from him like heat under stage lights. The man who once commanded the MIC now looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The irony was brutal. The same Stern who had once mocked celebrity hypocrisy now stood as its most awkward representative. Gutfeld didn't need to make anything up. He simply pointed at Stein and said, "Look," and what we saw was the tragic unraveling of a man who had forgotten what made him great. Stern wasn't just out of touch. He seemed to have erased his own past. Gone was the edgy outsider who thrived on being hated by the elite. In his place was someone desperately seeking acceptance from the very crowd he used to offend for sport. And Gutfeld made sure no one missed it. The takedown got even sharper when clips began circulating online.
Radio show, Howard Stern defended wokeism, saying it's a compliment when someone calls him woke. Listen.
If woke means I can't get behind Trump, which is what I think it means, or that I support people who want to be transgender, or I'm for the vaccine, well, dude.
Stern got even more pathetic, wondering how she doesn't nap.
When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country.
Gutfeld didn't need to scream or throw punches. He spoke with chilling precision, and the internet lit up like a wildfire. Viewers across the spectrum didn't just laugh. They nodded. They recognized a truth they'd felt for years. but never dared to say aloud. Stern's transformation wasn't new, but this was the moment it got publicly called out, and not by just anyone, but by someone with his own rebellious empire. Gutfeld's rise was a mirror image of Stern's fall. He was raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically bold, the very things Stern used to be. People had long questioned Stern's change, but this was the explosion that blew the whole conversation wide open. Even Stern's defenders had trouble explaining it away. Gutfeld didn't just hurt his pride. He exposed a contradiction Stern couldn't cover up anymore. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't even about personality. It was about authenticity. Stern had lost the one thing that made him dangerous: his ability to tell the uncomfortable truth. No matter who it offended, Gutfeld, love him or hate him, still had that fire in his voice. As clips of the segment racked up millions of views, one thing became painfully clear. Stern's silence wasn't strength. It was surrender. And that silence spoke louder than any insult Gutfeld could have thrown his way. The king of controversy had nothing to say. Stern's defenders scrambled to spin the moment, claiming he'd evolved or grown up, but viewers weren't buying it. They saw through the Polish shoot, the celebrity dinner parties, and the safe radio interviews. This wasn't evolution. It was extinction.
Stern being holed up in his house that long, it explains a lot of things, like how you forget how other people live, especially in hard times like a pandemic. For the longest time, 2 years in fact, the same time Stern's been AWOL, I wondered where he went. Not physically, but mentally. I bet you did too. Remember his screeds about COVID? They were epic and angry, and not to mention wrong.
When are we going to stop putting up with the idiots in this country and just say, it's mandatory to get vaccinated? F them, f their freedom. I want my.
What made it worse was that Stern didn't fight back. No bold monologue on his next show. No scathing takedown. No signature rant. Just quiet. The same man who once tore into presidents, media moguls, and fellow entertainers now blinked in stunned silence as his throne was ripped away live on screen. And that's the thing. Gutfeld didn't beat Stern with volume. He beat him with truth. A sharp, focused truth that hit harder than 1,000 shock jock sound bites. The moment had passed, and Stern missed it. And once that window closed, there was no crawling back through it. The man who built a career yelling at the world suddenly seemed terrified of offending anyone. Stern didn't just change. He completely disconnected from the identity he once wore like armor, and in the process, he lost his edge, his fire, and his claim to rebellion. Meanwhile, Gutfeld only gained power. Every moment Stern stayed silent gave Gutfeld another inch of ground. By the end of the week, the narrative had already shifted. Stern was no longer the icon. He was the warning label for what happens when rebellion turns into reputation management. One of the wildest twists came when Stern tried to act like his support for politicians made him brave. "I'd vote for that wall over there," he once said to Kamala Harris, thinking it was a compliment. He didn't even realize he'd compared her intellect to a slab of concrete. That's not bold. That's clueless. Gutfeld didn't need to exaggerate. Stern handed him the material. The man who built an empire mocking phoniness now lived in the very castle of fakeness guarded by PR representatives, stylists, and Hollywood handlers.
Watch them on Saturday Night Live with the where they have Maya Rudolph playing you. Mm-hmm. I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God.
There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now, I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave, I think it's literally on the line.
So a guy who's supposed to be funny for a living now claims her candidacy is too important to joke about. This is a guy who once joked right after the Columbine massacre that the killers should have raped the students before killing them. Ugh. Not that I like that Stern, but this pendulum swing from saying the most tasteless thing in the universe to putting your balls in a Tic Tac container. You gotta wonder what's going on here. It's striking that the king of the most misogynistic humor ever now turns into a breathless over a progressive, hopelessly shallow can.
The truth didn't need dressing up. It just needed a stage. And that's exactly what Gutfeld gave it. A stage. A massive one. He didn't bring rage. He brought clarity. He painted the picture of a man so far from where he started. You couldn't even draw a line between the two anymore. The audience didn't need convincing. They already saw it. The saddest part, Stern thought this evolution was progress. He thought being quiet and agreeable meant he'd grown. But what he really did was trade power for approval. He traded shock for safety. And in that trade, he lost the very thing that made him a legend. Gutfeld had one job: to remind the world of what Stone used to be. And he did it brilliantly, not with venom, but with contrast. He took the old Stone and held him up next to the new one like a before and after picture that no one could unsee. Even the jokes hit harder than any insult ever could. The guy who joked about choline now says the country's too fragile for satire. Gutfeld mocked. The crowd was stunned because it was true. The man who once joked about everything now walks on eggshells. That wasn't evolution. That was eraser. Stone erased his edge, dulled his voice, and polished his act until it was safe enough for cocktail parties and late-night fluff segments. But he forgot that his fans never came for safe. They came for truth. The rise of Gutfeld didn't happen in a vacuum. It filled a void. The void left behind by Stone's retreat. When Howard gave up the fight, someone else stepped into the ring. And Gutfeld didn't just step in. He lit it up with gasoline and a microphone. This showdown wasn't about age or experience. It was about courage.
Happy Friday, America! Oh man, tonight is a special night. It's Feminine Friday, where all the panelists are women. Tonight we have Kennedy. Yeah! David McDowell. Kat Tim. And Janine Garofalo. All right. A long way for a meat joke. Okay, I hope you had a good week. I did, and no thanks to Howard Stern. True, the New York Post reported that Stern hit a chic restaurant in NYC with a crew of A-listers, including Jimmy Kimmel, Jennifer Aniston, Jon Hamm, Justin Theroux, Jason Bateman. I was not invited.
The courage to stay honest, messy, unfiltered, and unpredictable. Gutfeld still has it, and Stone gave it away piece by piece in exchange for praise from people who never respected him to begin with. When Stone went about how tired he felt after dinner with celebrities, the public rolled their eyes. Exhausted from what? They asked. From wine tastings, from pretending to be edgy when you're more concerned with staying invited to the next awards show. Even Stone's fans, the real ones, saw what happened. The lion had become a lapdog. The loudest voice in radio was now whispering about how hard it is to walk through his mansion. It wasn't funny. It was tragic. And Gutfeld, with one smirk and a few razor-sharp lines, reminded the world that rebellion isn't about fame. Gutfeld didn't just take Stone down. He replaced him. He didn't need to yell or shock. He spoke with conviction, and the public felt it. In an industry gasping for authenticity, Greg delivered what Howard abandoned. And now the world watches as Stone fades into the background, a once mighty rebel who traded relevance for reputation. And Gutfeld, he stands at the MIC, fire still burning, unafraid to strike and louder than ever. Because in the end, the world doesn't remember who whispered politely. They remember who wasn't afraid to shout when it mattered. And on that night, it wasn't Stone who stood tall. It was Gutfeld, live, loud, and absolutely unshaken.